what's happening here tonight is we have a whole group of people who are really passionate about making a difference. And they come from business, primarily business and academia. And the intention was to have them come together and share their best practices, which they did. What inspired me to do this event in the beginning was because of my grandson Felix, little Felix. He's 2.5 and he's wonderful. And I want his future to be sustainable because right now I'm concerned that it may not be. So this gives me hope. Hearing all the ideas tonight and hearing things that are already in place gives me a lot of hope.
The first thing I ask people to do is think. To think about energy because it is hard to see. It is invisible. It is really hard to nail down. But if you think about it, what is happening to keep my room warm, to have me move from here to there? Think about that energy. That's the first step, and it's by far the hardest. This is getting a little bit easier now after the Japanese nuclear problem, after Horizon oil spill, all the talk about frontier and unconventional oil, transmission lines, wind farms. People are starting to think about energy a bit more. I think the main thing is that we need to start with a small group of people to come together with ideas on motivating others and on leadership, developing leaders. How can we get leaders of today and leaders of tomorrow to get involved in really moving us forward to a sustainable lifestyle?
One of the key pieces of integrating sustainability into our decisions is not only putting a price on it, which is really tough to do, but also to take a look at different ways of looking at those decisions to make them viable within organizations. I think that, especially when you look at things like the Gulf, the Deepwater Horizon issue, what's happening in Japan right now with the nuclear power plants, it never ceases to amaze me how much money we can come up with when we're in crisis mode, right? But when we're not in crisis mode, it's really difficult to get ourselves to the point where we make this important and we make the right decisions. So I think the other part of rethinking sustainability for me is that as individuals, we need to commit to making this important enough to be proactive about it.
In reference to just understanding the business case for sustainable development, if you look across all industry sectors, mining, forestry, petroleum, utilities, hospitality, telecommunications, etc., if you look across all industry sectors and add up the reasons that companies embrace sustainable development, in total, across all industry sectors, you'll come up with about a dozen reasons. And the reasons are shown here from points 1 through 12. Depending on what industry sector you're in, my sense is that if you want to advance sustainable development within that industry sector, you better be well familiar with the key business drivers as to why sustainable development is important to your business if you want to drive it forward. When we first started to practice sustainable development in Canada in the early 90s, and it started in the resources sector with the mining, forestry, petroleum, and utility companies, we at the time found that if we wanted to open a new mine somewhere in the world, whether it was in northern Ontario or Wisconsin or Venezuela or Papua New Guinea, it really didn't matter. When we went into those localities around the world, we had to be able to demonstrate with underneath our arm with a tangible track record performance in the area of sustainable development and environmental stewardship. And if we could not demonstrate that, the probability of us gaining licensing to open those new facilities was very much limited. So it came down to the fact that if you wanted to remain in business, you better be good at sustainable development.
In Antarctica, I was with a number of leaders in the sustainability area. One of them was a gentleman with KPMG, and he's got a concept he calls green by default. And what that does is really is an example of this. He said is when they were looking at changing all of their printers all across all the KPMG offices, he said, well, why don't we, when we buy the new printers, have the default setting to print on both sides of the pages? So that people have to physically change the setting on the photocopier or the printer to get it on one-sided. So it's green by default. And so they're looking at that mechanism throughout their entire organization to see how they can facilitate change so people don't have to do it themselves. I think it's going to happen much like Peter mentioned in his presentation. It's become cool to be green. But that will require legislation. That was one point I wanted to make. All those things, not smoking, seat belts, those require legislation in order for them then to become cool eventually. So I think becoming green will require some hard points and forceful direction on legislation, and then it'll become cool, and then everybody will be talking about it in the social networks.
Now we're going to hear the three panels, three breakout groups come back with their ideas.
Basically, we started off first by saying the water tribe must go to the wine bar and collect stuff to inspire ourselves. All right. We had about 15, 20 minutes of general banter, and then we came on the idea of a green Groupon. All right. And the idea was, how do we actually create critical mass? And this stems from the ideas that Yasmin put forward, which was, how do you create competitive advantage through integration of sustainability? And how do you broaden the responsibility for businesses to do triple bottom line? All right? So what we said is, let's create this green Groupon initiative, which forms and acts like a cooperative. The idea is that it's a voluntary membership. You make it sexy and cool so that the young, cool, hip people, but people like ourselves that are in the creative class, also can participate as well. And you leverage all the technologies to branch out for that. What you do with that whole Green Groupon initiative is that you promote every day in your inbox a product or a service that has a reduction to your carbon footprint.
In the conversations that we started having in our room, some of the overall common things that were coming through was that the biggest one was that affluence breeds wastefulness. And it's just become a societal norm that this is how we behave, and we can, afford to throw things, or we have this disposable kind of mentality because we can afford to, like we talked about the $27 DVD, we talked about, the print cartridges that cost more than a new printer with the print cartridges. We also started talking about how it wasn't so far removed, like our parents and our grandparents would invest in things that last longer, and they look at it totally differently. Like, they look at it like, this needs to last me for the long haul, as opposed to, oh, who cares, I can just buy another one next year.
We discussed a lot of the cultural behavior and the cultural changes, and how the youth of today is coming up, and whoever's leading the business practices now, in order for them to come into their footsteps, is also another big trend with the marketing and the communications that really needs to be reiterated throughout the businesses, because their languages are very, very different. Also, the education that they're actually getting right today is much different than the ones we got yesterday. And they actually are almost ahead of us, even though we're teaching them.
Well, it's a commonality of thinking. I mean, the whole theme here is a group of like-minded people who know there's a place we have to get to. We're not there yet. What do we need to do to get there? We know that we're part of the solution. I think everybody in this room is part of the solution. It's making those solutions work together.
It's more collaborative. It's about people participating and a whole different way of actually going through a session. It's not just me talking to you, it's us talking to each other.
And I think the eureka moment I had is that sustainable initiatives need to get down to the level where they're actually affordable and make sense to the point that everybody can implement them.
In order for sustainability to be sustainable, it needs to really be integrated into our everyday lives, into our decisions that we make every day. And for that to happen, it needs to involve more than technology, more than buildings. It plays right into how we socially see ourselves and how we make and how we live our lives.
I do have a busy schedule, but this is one event I really wanted to make because I knew with Yasmin it was going to be really interesting, and it has been. I've learned a lot today.